Hello everybody, I'm Nick and welcome to another episode of Code Cop, the series where we go over bad advice provided in places like LinkedIn, Twitter or blogs, and we try to turn it into good advice and learn from it. In this video I have a piece of advice from LinkedIn, which is a terrible place to get C# and .NET advice, and it's particularly interesting to me because it can look like good advice, but I think you're gonna be better off following this, mainly because you have to change a lot in your code to even facilitate that in the first place. And in my opinion, it's not worth it. So in this video, we're going to see what that problem is and how we can learn from it. If you like that of content and you want to see more, make sure you subscribe for more training. Check out my courses on dometrain.com. Okay, so let's take a look at the advice. And this advice is about the flexible repository. So what we have here is a user repository where you have a find user by username, nicely named method returns a user, accepts a username, then find user by email, same thing, get adult users, which accepts an age. Isn't that supposed to be 18? I guess maybe not every country has the same adult age, so okay, maybe I get it. Then get users by age, okay, that's fine. And then get users by age and name, which why would you search for that? Well, you would search for that only if you wanted to make a LinkedIn post about some pretty bad advice. And then the good advice, the thing that fixes it, is just have two methods. Get user that accepts a predicate, a function of user and boolean, so you can pass an expression, and the same thing in the get users. Now that's pretty crazy advice to me, especially for a traditional repository approach. And that's because repositories, as we know them, usually facilitate CRUD operations. So you have the create, you have the read by something, by a key or a value, you have the update, and then you have the delete, and sometimes you have partial update. Now, maybe the user just omitted the create, update, and delete, so that's fine. But even the retrieving something, passing an expression for something that might hit a database is not a great idea because, well, first, if you want to go technical performance-wise, you're going to allocate some extra things that are not needed, but that's not my point. My point is you have to take then this expression and turn it into something that can call a database. And this something can be translated into a Redis call, which accepts those commands, set X or get or whatever. Then you have traditional RDBMSs, so MS SQL, MariaDB, MySQL, and so on. And then you can have NoSQL databases, Cosmos DB, DynamoDB, whatever in different cloud providers. And then you can also have things like Elasticsearch. You can have many different data stores for your repository. The repository is just an abstraction over it. And the reason why we have methods like this in the top is because then you can take that based on the contract and translate it into a query this database will accept. However, in this example with the function, well, it is extremely hard to take a predicate and translate the predicate to that whatever this data store accepts. It can happen, and in fact, Anti-Framework Core works that way, takes those expressions and writes SQL queries or whatever else queries it can. And there used to be projects like Link to SQL and so on. But those expressions are really, really hard to write translators for as me and you. Of course, this is LinkedIn. It takes like 2 likes for your post to blow up. And as you can see, the reactions have been amazing, great, fantastic. I'm going to go and change all my repositories to that. And I'm going to go to my ID and show you all this in action. So what I have here is this same user repository that this person showed in the infographic. And for the argument of this post, I'm using an in-memory list as a database, and we're going to change that. Now, I'm assuming this person meant that you should only use this with Anti-Framework Core, which, even then, I'm a bit iffy about it. Some people like to have a repository around it. Some people don't like to have a repository. Some people use specification. All that is up to you. But when you give general advice, I'm going to treat it as general advice unless you specify what it is. So this is the bad one, and this is the good one. And presumably in my link approach, I'm gonna do something like this, where we have just the predicate being passed into the where method, and then we get single or default, for example, if this was nullable, but in the example it wasn't. So I'm just gonna go back to single, and then here get users and return a list. Now that is great if you're using something like Anti-Framework Core with Link, because Link is extremely powerful, and yeah, you can do something like this. In fact, Anti-Framework Core allows it by default to do these things with Link, and that's its whole thing. You take Link, you turn it into SQL, and the better Link you know, the better you can use Anti-Framework Core and get those complicated queries into SQL and back without having to know SQL. And Link is a very powerful skill to have and know. That's why we just launched a brand new course on Dometrain called From Zero to Hero, Link in .NET, which goes into everything you need to know about Link. And in fact, since it is Dome Train's first birthday, you can get that course or any other course for 40% off until the 30th of April using code birthday40. You can get any bundle 20% off with code birthday20, and you can get 15% off your first year of Dome Train Pro, our annual plan that gives you access to all of our courses using birthday15. And in fact, since we're talking about EF Core, we have an 8-hour EF course by the same author, Hannes, who made the course on Link. So that's a great pair to buy. But what if you're not using EF Core, you're using something like Dapper? What's your option? Because all you have here, if you're using Dapper, is a private read-only IDB connection that you got somehow, and then you have to somehow take that expression, the predicate, and turn it into a SQL query. And again, I have to add Dapper in the mix to show that, but what you're gonna end up doing is using, for example, the query method here, and you can't just pass a predicate into the query method and say, you know, single or to list. The whole point of Dapper is if you like your SQL, you can pass down your SQL and you can get that result back very, very efficiently with great, lovely performance. But you can't really do that with a predicate. Now, what you could do is you can use a link to SQL sort of translator. And in fact, I don't know how many of you know this, but there's this library over here called microorm.dapper.repositories that allows you to do the following. You can actually install this, and then my repository will change from this to being a public class user repository. Ignore this interface at the top for a second, and it's going to be a Dapper repository of the type I want to have a repository for. So users, and then I'm going to have the constructor. Let's initialize it, and that's that. So now what I have in my program.cs, if I want to use a user repository, is a new user repository. I can pass down my DB connection, which for now is null because I don't have any provider. And if you want, you can also pass down a SQL generator with a provider specific to that technology. So MS SQL, Postgres, MySQL, SQLite, or Oracle. So I'm going to use MS SQL. And if you did something like that, then you can have what that user said. But even then, that wouldn't be a repository you write. That's a sort of generated repository. And you can still write your own methods in here that look the same as that person showed. So with this, I can go here and say find all, pass down the predicate, and then say to list and return it. Of course, for this to work, I have to change this to an expression of type function. But once I do that, my code will compile. And then in the front end, I can say get users in the same concept and say users.username equals whatever. So this will use Dapper behind the scenes. This micro ORM Dapper repositories is using Dapper behind it, but it's translating the link into SQL, which at that point, if you're doing that, why you're not using EF Core in the first place. And by the way, there would be a few modifications you have to do into the user class. So you would say like table is users, maybe my username is the key of this database, and then maybe if I want to have like a status or a soft delete mechanism or even an updated @ that updates every time I update this resource, then I can have something like this. And this will all work. However, like I said, why would you just not use EF Core for this and you go with this Dapper solution? And yeah, this works now with Dapper, making it accessible for anyone who wants to use it. But then what happens if you want to use like Cosmos DB, DynamoDB, Redis, Elasticsearch? All that repository falls apart and you can no longer use that interface, which remember is a contract that's supposed to work with everything. But if it makes it easy to only work with one thing, you're really going to have a tough time building it for any other piece of technology. I generally think that the spirit of this advice is good. The problem is if you try to follow it, you're going to find very quickly many pitfalls. And because you can't have such a generic concept for everything, you're going to try to adapt your code and end up with worse code than what you could have if you specialize each method to what your application can do or needs to do and what your database and data store can do. But now I want to know from you, are you using predicates for your repository or have you used them in the past? Leave a comment down below, let me know. And also let me know if you're using EF or Dapper. That's very important. Well, that's all I had for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, keep coding.